Whammy. A whammy bar could also be known as a tremolo bar, a vibrato bar. Sometimes we talk about the whole thing, not just the bar itself. We might say a system, a tremolo system. I'll talk about the subtle differences of that later. Also, I'm saying a bar, some people call it the arm, but essentially it's a thing on a guitar that when you use it, you can change the pitch of the notes you're playing. So for example, you could strum your guitar, press down on your whammy bar, and what it does is it makes your notes get lower. We might call that a dive. You dive on your whammy bar. The notes get lower because as you dive, the strings move, or the bridge moves, so the string tension lessens. Therefore, the dive. Now, some of these whammy bars allow you to go the other way as well and pull up and get a note that goes higher as you increase the tension of the string. But some only allow you to dive. The ones that go both ways we call a floating bridge, because where the bridge meets the surface of the guitar, it's raised, so it's allowed to go up and down, it's floating. Whereas on the ones that dive, the bridge actually sits flat on the guitar. So when you press down on the bar, it raises to let the strings decrease in tension, but you can't push or pull the bar up because there's nowhere for your bridge to go because it's touching the guitar body. Now, one thing to note about floating systems is the string tension and the spring tension balance each other out, so they fall into the exact right position you want for your guitar to stay in tune, which means if you break a string, suddenly the tension of the springs is going to be greater than the tension of the strings and the balance will go, so your strings will go out of tune. This isn't really a problem in a non-floating one because the springs pull the bridge flat against the body. So even when a string breaks, it's not going to affect the tension, which is always stronger below. Now, one thing to note is string gauge. I've got a whole other video about string gauges, but essentially it's the thickness of a string. And because the strings are different thicknesses, going from your low E, the thickest, to your high E, the thinnest, when you dive with it or pull with it, the tension in them is going to change at unequal rates, which means if you hold down a chord and play the chord and then dive with it, each string in that chord won't change pitch at the same rate. So you won't, for example, be able to dive from a G down to an F. It will go all out of tune with each other. So though it might be called a tremolo and a vibrato system as well, truly it's actually a vibrato. Vibrato means change in pitch, whereas tremolo means change in loudness. But really, those words have become synonymous. They're totally interchangeable now. Vibrato, tremolo. In fact, when Leo Fender created his, he called it the tremolo system. I'll just point out the videos you see in the background come from my videos in the bridge series that I've made, where I look at different bridges. So I've got here the standard Strat bridge and also a Floyd Rose bridge. In those videos, I break down how they work, looking at all the little bits inside them, and also show you the best way to set up your guitar with one on. You may be surprised to know that the original tremolo system goes back to the 1930s with someone called Doc Kaufman who invented it, and it was popular on Epiphone archtop guitars. Essentially what he had was called the vibrola system. The next big innovation was the Bigsby, and that was sort of brought along by Merle Travis, a country player who had a problem with the vibrola system because it kept going out of tune. So Bigsby invented something to stop that happening, and essentially the way his design differs from most other designs is that the strings roll over the bridge and are connected to the bridge. So when you push down on your tremolo bar, you're rolling the bridge, you're rolling the strings. Whereas with the other systems like the Fender one, which came next, it goes through the guitar body and you've got a much more stable, long strength that's being pulled backwards and forwards via the springs. Because there's more springs on that kind of system, you've got a lot more pitch change that you can really offer by pushing and pulling your tremolo. When Fender first invented his, he did have floating ones, but he then went on to really finalize his synchronized version. The synchronized meant that it wasn't floating, you could just go down with it. And essentially it also meant that all the strings were held in place over the bridge and moved together at the same time. Synchronized. Although it is absolutely possible to set up a system like that in a floating manner, as I explain in my video on the Fender Stratocaster bridge. Fender's system came about in 1954, and I'm quite surprised to know that whammy, the term whammy, has been around since the 50s. So it is sort of related to that Fender style, even though we now really think of it in terms of the ones that go up and down, and in particular, the type of floating bridge which has a locking nut system. Now, we would probably know about the Floyd Rose. That was the first bridge like that. The Floyd Rose was invented in 1979. And there's been lots of versions since that they make, and licensed out versions, and innovative sort of other companies making versions based on the Floyd Rose. Essentially, a locking nut means just behind the nut on your bridge, where your strings go over and then down to the tuning pegs, there's the ability to clamp down on the strings. So once your guitar is in tune, you clamp down on the string at that end. The strings are also clamped down at the bridge end. So there's nowhere at all for them to give or go, which means when you let go of your tremolo, they go back into exactly the same position, therefore staying in tune, or at least having more tuning stability, because the more you dive with your strings and pull them, the weaker they're going to get over time. So that will cause them to go out of tune. Also, the more you do all of this, the springs on the back will get used and used and used, and their tension will slowly decrease, causing things to slightly go out of tune. So it's not perfect, but the really good ones are made and designed to allow for all of those elements to be very, very minimal. So it's really in tune. And this is in general what people call the whammy bar. It's really popular in heavy metal. Great, well, thanks for watching. If you liked this video and found it interesting, please do share it on your different social media accounts. Sharing is one of the best ways of supporting me. I really appreciate it. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course YouTube. And anytime I mention or someone leaves a comment, I try my very best to reply. Until next time, happy strumming.